Good afternoon and good morning to some of our colleagues. We have people from all around the country that are joining us today. My name is Michaela Denny, and I serve as Education and Training Director at Voices for Florida, and it's my pleasure to introduce this webinar this morning and our facilitator, who will be Kristen Murray. The Perspectives, a Case Against Othering, a Call for Intersectionality in the Anti-Trafficking Movement is the topic of our webinar today. And our lovely facilitator will be Kristen Murray. She is a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and is the creator of Authentic Witness. Kristen graduated from the Florida A&M University, that's here in Tallahassee, with a BS in journalism. And she's always been fascinated with the life stories of other people and believes that people sharing those stories or giving witness is a way to spread knowledge and healing. Kristen has worked as a teacher, a journalist, and has spent almost a decade in the nonprofit sector. And during that time, she has worked on several certifications around trauma, narrative storytelling, and healing-centered approaches. And most recently, Kristen has completed her journey as a certified breathwork practitioner to help people soothe their somatic systems and reconnect with their innermost self. Across all of her career paths, three things have remained consistent for Kristen: the value of human connection, the power of human narrative, and the ability for each individual to live embodied. Kristen works with individuals, nonprofits, and corporations to deepen connection with self and build relationships with others. In every place she steps into, Kristen believes in giving witness. She gathers people to connect over food, stories, and personhood, and she wants people to remember, be you here. We love you, even the broken bits. This is a place where your inner self gets most illuminated, nurtured, and loved. It's a place where you can give witness authentically. Please welcome Kristen.
Good morning, everyone. It's super exciting to see y'all coming in from all over the country, like legit. This is great. And I'm super excited to share space with the panelists this morning as we just have an honest, candid discussion about what intersectionality means and what we can do to push this forward. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our incredible panelists today. I'm so excited, and I hope you all are too. First up is Chanel Dion. Chanel serves as the Victim Services Coordinator at the Dolores Barr-Weaver Policy Center with the Open Doors Outreach Network, which serves survivors ages 10 to 24. In 2015, Chanel became a self-published author, y'all, and sold over 1,000 copies in her first 6 months of publication. Chanel was awarded Survivor Advocate of the Year award by the Florida Attorney General Ashley Moody at the 2020 Human Trafficking Summit. Chanel is currently a senior at Texas Women's University, where she is studying sociology, y'all, and plans to continue pursuing her education to become a licensed social worker. Okay, and what does she do in her spare time? She speaks at community events where she unashamedly shares her life's journey, her struggles around exploitation, hardships, victories, and triumphs. Chanel faced many trials in her adolescence and younger adult years, but today stands transformed as a living witness of God's amazing grace. Chanel's goal is not only to shed light on the exploitation that occurs here in Northeast Florida, but desires to bring empowerment and hope to others who share similar experiences. Welcome, Chanel. Super excited to have you in this space. Yeah. Next up is Christian Eduardo. Christian Eduardo is an advocate, speaker, and educator for anti-trafficking initiatives, immigration, and LGBTQ plus rights. He is a survivor of international and domestic sex and labor trafficking, a Mexican immigrant, HIV positive, a member of the LGBTQ plus community, and someone who speaks openly about the mental health challenges he has faced that frequently result from trauma. Although these are parts of him, he is whole and he cannot be defined. Christian Eduardo is also a student who is science and engineering oriented. Christian Eduardo's inspiration for his social justice work is to give insight that victims always remain human beings. You know, I love that. That touched me right there. Christian Eduardo is the lead human trafficking consultant and survivor with Shovana Powell Consulting, shaping national human trafficking trainings and policies. He also serves as a survivor consultant for ECPAT USA, the Center for Court Innovation, and USCRI. He is the co-founder of United Immigrants of New York, a coalition of immigration advocates providing accessible education and resources to Spanish-speaking immigrants in New York. Christian Eduardo is on the steering committee for New Yorkers for the Equality Model and Louisiana for Survivors Justice Coalition, and has been instrumental in the development of the Equality Model training and legislation across the US. Welcome, Christian. Super excited to have you. Next up is Crystal Hamilton. Crystal is incredible. After surviving domestic violence and sexual exploitation, she is fighting back by empowering others as she combats against the exploitation of people, specializing in helping children, young adults, and single mothers in the sex industry. She also provides survivor voice trainings and presentations for law enforcement, medical staff, teachers, faith-based organizations, and professionals in the field at summits, workshops, and in other related topics. As a young mother coming out of the aftermath of a destructive relationship, Crystal believed she had found a more promising future with a medical doctor who courted her and her infant son when she was only 21. However, over the next 4 years, she was forced into sex trafficking by him under the guise of an escort service he operated. After escaping and staying in hiding for a decade, she now lives bold and empowered. Through deep healing and truly connecting to a higher source of power, she found a calling to impact the lives of others trapped in the industry. She assists and equips young women who have been sexually exploited through domestic sex trafficking and actively going into juvenile detention centers, county jails, mental health facilities, group homes, and working with the local Department of Children and Families to speak the truth about the vulnerability and dangers these populations face daily. Crystal has made a direct impact in the community through resilient sharing, living by example, and coaching survivors back into society and into living into their potential. She is currently awaiting to run her own drop-in center with the hopes of making an even greater impact with strides to help heal, connect, enrich, and serve this population by decreasing the vulnerabilities they face. Crystal is completing her paralegal studies in the spring of 2022. We're almost there. In her downtime, Crystal loves adventuring with her children and cooking a variety of foods. So we have that in common. We love food. This is great. So super excited to have everyone in this space today as we really have a conversation that is the case against othering. And I wanted to start off just bringing a little bit of context around where the word intersectionality came from. So it originated in 1989 by Kimberle Crenshaw, and she wrote in the University of Chicago's Legal Forum. This was her quote. And I'm going to read it directly, so that's why I'm looking up here. Because the intersectional experience is greater than the sum of racism and sexism, any analysis that doesn't take intersectionality into account cannot sufficiently address the particular manner in which Black women are subordinated, she wrote in the paper. And so from that time, 2015, the Oxford English Dictionary picked up intersectionality. Then Merriam-Webster defined it as the complex, cumulative way in which the effects of multiple forms of discrimination, racism, sexism, classism, combine, overlap, or intersect, especially in the experiences of marginalized individuals and groups. And so today, as we open this conversation, I really hope that all the participants have done a little bit of research and reading of their own based on the articles that were sent out by the Voices for Florida team. And so we're just gonna hop right in. It's important that we acknowledge how history has brought us to this point, right? Resmaa Menakem, he says all the time, something happened, right? We didn't just arrive here. There's a historical context. And so it's important that we acknowledge how history brought us here to the point we are and address the systemic barriers that exist in the anti-trafficking movement and the broader social services field. So my first question for all of the panelists, and we can just kind of hop in like popcorn, what are the systematic failures you have seen in your own experiences and the work you all do now. So we just want to talk about the systemic failures you have seen in your own experience and the work that you all do now.
Well, I have experienced a lack of follow through. We get them to a certain point and we excite, the client and or victim or survivor, however we want to label them. They are their person, so we should call them by their name. But I have experienced a lack of follow through and not having that next step. So, going into the transition phase to make them independent and help them get to that point of success.
I will add to that. What I have seen is a lack of, not even a lack, but when there is an inability to connect a survivor with resources, the ending result always ends up being turning to the juvenile justice system or just the justice system alone. So in order to, they call it as a way to protect the survivor from themselves. So instead of, seeking out ways to be more creative in the ways that we reach and support survivors, a lot of the times the alternative always ends up being, turning to the justice system.
What I have seen in the anti-trafficking movement are a lot of things, to be honest. I think that I have seen racism, a lot of white privilege, to be honest. I think that most of the services and resources are just tailored for people who are born in the United States and that are identified or are white passing. That's the reality. And the other thing that I had seen in the movement is that there are no services for males. I experienced that a lot. When I was really looking for a lot of services, there were the services available, but literally it was like, because you're not female, like we cannot give you the services. That was so shocking to me because that means that not only me, but other like male victims were being ignored. And a lot of times we don't see how the same movement keeps perpetuating like the same exploitation. Why would I want to live exploitation? Why would I want to live the sex trade if there are no services for me? If there is no path for me. So I think that a lot of times we don't think about this. One other big thing that I have seen is that the lack of services for immigrants. It's very hard being an immigrant and receiving services. You don't qualify literally for anything. So you cannot access those services. And one thing that I really want to highlight now that we're talking about intersectionality, I don't see people like me in the movement. I don't see people of color. I don't see immigrants. I don't see members of the LGBTQ plus community. I don't see Black people of color. Like we are always, and I think that especially like marginalized communities, communities of color, all those that we have been impacted, we are always the survivors. We're always the ones that are like, can you speak? Can you come here? We're the ones that are really like being executive directors, like CEOs, the ones that are like, I don't know, getting the funding are white people. And this is a reality that it's not only happening in one state, all across the country. And we need to talk about this. If we're going to talk about intersectionality, we really want to tackle human trafficking, we need to start doing the work as people, as communities, as an organization. So this is a reality. We need to start changing and bringing people from marginalized communities in positions of power.
Christian, you just said a mouthful there. I think everybody, all the panelists are nodding in agreement. And so when you talk about, the marginalization of queer folks or the lack of diverse representation in the movement, it really, it hits home for a lot of people on this call. And so we're going to get into a little bit later what are some strategies that we can use, right? So that shifts, because that is a huge issue, whether it's the lack of cultural humility and understanding of people who might not have the same experiences, right? This is not, the anti-trafficking movement is not cookie cutter. There's not one approach that works for every person. And so one of the things that I often hear about is when people use the term human trafficking, Crystal, they're often referring to just sex trafficking, right? Why is it important to be precise with the language that we use when we're talking about the anti-trafficking movement?
The anti-trafficking movement, although we always kind of gear towards sexual exploitation, it's really not all sexual exploitation. We tend to look over the labor trafficked victims who are just as abused as the sexual victims. And sometimes, and I've seen, especially here in Florida, we see a lot of labor trafficking victims who are crossed over into the sexual exploitation as well. And we tend not to have enough laws in place to help them. So the resources for labor trafficking victims are not as grand as sexually exploited victims. And I think it's because we don't have enough of them that step up to the plate. They're afraid. And it's also from experience, majority of our labor traffic victims are marginalized population. You know, there are Asian victims, there are, you know, our South American, Mexican, Latinx or Latinos. We tend to see that they are most humble and won't come forward. They tend to be the most submissive, which is scary in a lot of ways. That's why they don't get the proper help that they need. And I believe that we don't have enough people to lobby against laws to make the labor side an issue and more predominant. And it is an issue here in Florida, especially in Southwest Florida, where we have more of the farmers market per se. We have a lot of farmland. We have a lot of vegetation here in Southwest Florida and the more southern Florida. Not that Florida isn't all the same, but we tend to have a lot more of our migrant workers who are abused and labor trafficked, and there's not enough of us to voice for them. And I can be just one person, and not that we don't have a ton of allies here, but we do need more support, because once they come out of labor trafficking and they identify as a victim, then we lose services. So we don't have enough legal services to help them. You know, it's hard to prove. And so just the support for them is not as grand. And also for our minors as well. We overlook labor trafficked minors because our safe harbor law in Florida doesn't really detail on how to help them in that law.
Absolutely. And you touched on the Safe Harbor Act, which I was definitely going to ask you about. So I'm glad that you did. One of the things that also comes up, right, is age restricted services. It's an issue that keeps bubbling up. Can you speak a little bit more about that and how that impacts survivors?
The age restricted services has become somewhat like a pandemic. And I find that after, you know, the mid-20s, it's very difficult to help a survivor get into certain programs or organizations that have the funding. However, their funding is only limited to a certain age. And I find that across the nation. And sometimes we have to take survivors out of state because of organizations don't cover a certain age. And we're finding, you know, survivors that are younger have more services, obviously, because we have, you know, laws in place where our children and families come into play, and they have the help. And then when they age out, it's like, well, where do they go? And because these children or young adults are so independent, we try to cripple them by taking that away from them. And that causes our runaway and our missing persons to go up. So we have just so many things that line up when services are not available for all ages. I also find in helping young men, I have a lot of young men that come through. I run into a lot. I have people that call me for them. I don't have placement for them. I don't have a place for them to go. I might find them a good mentor, but the mentor is not going to put them on their couch, or, house them in their room, And so we tend to find scenarios where it's hard to find somewhere for them to go, and they end up at a shelter or a halfway house where we're trying to help them get away from that type of environment, right? So we're going to try to help a survivor who has been exposed to maybe some illicit drugs, and then put them in a halfway house that doesn't have the boundaries that are needed for their recovery. And so I find that healing process is difficult with age. The older you are, the harder it is to find help. And crossing over into finding help is very difficult. So maybe having a new set of organizations that may be geared towards adults, and maybe single women, single men, an organization that only deals with young men, boys, and, the QT community come help. There needs to be a help there. We have a lack of that, and it's hurting recovery and healing.
Thank you so much, Crystal, for weighing in on that. My next question is geared towards Chanel. I was hearing Crystal talk a little bit about the differences in the services that are provided based on age, right? And Chanel, I know that you at the Policy Center work with mostly girls, and often girls of color specifically. Can you explain the concept of the adultification of Black girls and how you see it show up in the work that you do?
Yes, I can. The adultification of Black girls, it just basically means that Black girls are seen as more mature than other girls their age. When they are victimized, they are often blamed for their victimization, and people that come into contact or treating them as, or seeing them as less nurturing, more independent, and knowledgeable about experiences such as engaging in sex. So there's this expectation that young Black girls and teenage girls, they know better. And as a result, it almost gives people this responsibility to, not even this responsibility, but this like underlying agreement that it's okay for me to treat you this way. It's okay for me not to care. It's okay for me not to, it's okay for me not to show up for you in a way that I would for a white girl who may be going through the same experiences and have the same traumas and have gone through the exact same things that you have. But I see her as a victim, but I see you as someone who knows better. And so a lot of the times, the expectations are greater when it comes down to supporting Black survivors, and they are instead met with a lot of disciplinarian actions. And so we see this in school settings. We see this at home. We even see it in the criminal justice system. So, instead of coming with a more nurturing spirit, a more open understanding, empathy, we lack all of that. And I see that all the time when we're engaging with girls of colors. And it's not just from people from other races. I have to be honest and say that sometimes it even comes from people in our own community, where they define girls that we work with as those fast girls or those girls that know better. When in all honesty and truth, when you truly get to know them, I have learned that they don't know. They're children just like everyone else that we serve and support, and they have not gotten that that support and love and understanding that they needed. And a lot of the times, the way that what I have seen is Black girls, we tend to lack trust, and we even become resistant to care and support, because if you are, continuously faced with disciplinary action when instead you really need someone to show up and care for you, when it is time for you to, support to receive support from someone, you're in a space where you're like, you're going to have to gain my trust at this point, because I've had so many doors shut on me. I've had so many people tell me that I wasn't worthy of something. I've had so many people blame me for my experience. And so as a result, it takes a lot of rapport building, where a lot of the times with, girls of other race, sometimes that rapport becomes instant. And then for the Black girl, a lot of the times I may not see them come into a space where they're truly trust me, maybe until a few months or a year down the line, because they're so used to people seeing them one way, versus just seeing them for truly who they are. And they are human beings that deserve love, respect, and support, just like any other child on our planet. And so for me, that's what I have seen on a continual basis. I've had people pull me to the side, and another Black provider, because I'm Black, my girl, that she's just fast, she's just too much. And I'm like, she's not too much, she's not fast. She needs support. And a lot of the times people, we use the word trauma informed all the time. We coin the term so much, and we say, yeah, she has all this trauma, but there is no buts. It shouldn't be any buts. It should be, okay, now that we know what we know, how do we shift how we engage with this person, knowing what we know? How do we extend grace to them in knowing what we know? Because I will say, and like in my own experience, being a Black girl who has come from, exploitation and several other traumatic events in my life, what shifted for me is being around people that saw me beyond that saw me for me and said, despite, your lack of trust, I'm going to continue to fight. I'm going to continue to show up for you, regardless of the color of your skin, regardless of my bias that I think I may have about people and girls like you. So I think it's just, we just have to come to a place where we just see people as people, and we be honest with ourselves about the work that we need to do internally.
Absolutely. Chanel, you in the chat, people are like lighting up, doing all the hands, like, yes. There's a lot of that happening. And so there's something that I wanted to just point out about what you said, two things. So the first was, you talked about how over time that builds a distrust of government, social services, medical community, due to this trauma that is happening to you as an individual, right? But then there's also this historical traumatic continuum, that has happened to Black girls for generations. And so oftentimes I will hear providers say things like, this Black girl is difficult to work with, right? She's difficult to build a relationship with. And so my question for you, and for everyone on the panel, is, I heard you say there should be no but. And so how do we create a space where there is no but? Like, how do you as an individual do that? And we're going to get into that a little later, but how do you create that space where that but doesn't exist?
I definitely have learned over time not to take things personal. And I am really the type of person that has truly learned how to just respect people's journey and how they choose to show up in the world, because I don't know their whole story. I don't know why they are the way that they are. I don't know why they respond the way that they respond, but I know that they have a need and they desire support. As a human, we all desire connection and to build relationship. And so for me, it's just something that I have never shied away from, because I know that, people that are loud and upset, they deserve to be loved too. They deserve to be respected. And a lot of the times they're responding in that way is because they didn't receive that. And so this is that defense mechanism. And so for me, it's just really just saying, I hear you, I get it, I'll be pissed off too. And just keeping it just real and authentic, and just saying, well, how do we get to a place where, you can, show up and be angry, but still be able to get your point across and be heard and not be shut out of the room? How can you still advocate in a way for yourself that, you may have to challenge the narrative, you may have to challenge the people that you're working with, but you have to, do it in a way to where you will be heard. And so that has become some of the work that I do as well with the girls. It's like, girl, I get it. We can cuss, we can do all of that. But how do we get to a place where you can advocate in a way where you can be heard and not be shut out of your own system of care? Because sometimes they'll cut you out. Like if you're too hard to deal with, then they'll leave you out of the room. And we don't need that because it's their journey.
Yeah. And sometimes they don't have the discipline. So we find that the most defiant children are the ones, or defiant adults, those are the ones that have been not heard their whole life, really. And so I tend to just go to where they're at, and dealing with them with foster parents and stuff, and telling the caregivers, like, very honest, be honest with the caregivers. And I think sometimes if we are real about it, like, you just took this child in, or you're helping this adult, they are going to be difficult. A lot of times we don't want to tell them that, but I am, I'm going to tell you, you need to make sure that you have wraparound services. You're going to need a mentor. You're going to need someone to come in and help you sometimes. You're not going to be able to be the hero of their story. They have to be their own hero. And sometimes people want to take the prize for helping a victim. And that's the most annoying part of, how success happens. And that's how it goes down. It's like, be honest. As a survivor, I know when you're lying to me. I know when you're just trying to candy coat the situation. So does every other survivor. They know exactly your intentions. And they know that you might just be helping them to get a paycheck. They know that you're sitting there at that desk to collect a paycheck. You really don't want to help them. They know that. The senses are so heightened when you have a certain level of trauma that it's almost like a spidey senses. Almost like the kids can read right through you. They know you're lying. And it's like, don't do that. Just be honest, And I think sometimes honesty, we try to kind of give like a little bit of information because we don't want to ruffle anyone's feathers, and not on my side. I'd rather be very honest with you and help walk you through it and just tell you, hey, listen, they're going to throw something and they're going to tell you to shut up. They're going to cuss at you. I helped a young lady who cussed at me every day. Every day she hated me, and I still showed up. I showed up. She's 20 years old today. She's almost done with college. She has her own apartment. She has her own car. She's out of the life and has been doing very well. She was in foster care and went through like 10 different homes. No one can handle her. It was like, oh, wow. And she was arrested. I went to go every time she got arrested. I went over to the juvenile justice center and I went to visit her. She was like, why are you here? I'm like, why are you here? And so just being present and being consistent. When you're consistent, people, as far as recovery and healing, it helps the survivor.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And I would add, especially with when dealing with Black girls, a lot of the times you do hear that they're often hard to deal with, but I just want to really highlight the importance of showing up regardless of, because a lot of times I feel like sometimes providers, they sometimes become intimidated and like she's loud and she's upset all the time, but really and truly she's keeping tabs. And she's trying to see and navigate, like, is this person truly for me? And I remember when I first moved to Florida and started doing this work, one of the terms that one of my clients used to use was nice nasty, Miss Chanel, they're always so nice, nasty. I know they're not really for me. I know that they don't care, Miss Chanel, but they act nice, but Miss Chanel, it's nice, nasty, and I don't like it. And so, like Crystal said, they can see past it all. And so we have to just bring a level of authenticity to the work for sure.
I love that, and I appreciate it deeply. There was a question in the chat that in the Q&A that you all hit on. It was, how do I get them to trust me? I don't need to know the details of the story if they don't want to share, but how do I begin that level of trust? And I think what you all are saying is consistency, showing up, being there when you say you're going to be there, not being nice, nasty, maybe just being nice. Instead of trying to create a space where, you're trying to control their behavior, create space where there's just expansiveness for all of the ways that they might show up in a moment, and letting them know that however you show up in this moment, I'm going to rock with you. There's a lot of that people need to hear.
I think it's, not to interrupt you, but I think it's not punishing them for their reaction.
Mm-hmm. And I would also add, uphold your boundaries too. It's okay to uphold your boundaries. And I know a lot of the times when you are, trying to build rapport, you kind of want to always go the extra mile, but upholding your boundaries really goes a long way too. And a lot of the time survivors need to see that being practiced out in their lives, because they haven't seen it. They haven't been around people that have exercised healthy boundaries. And so it's important that we practice that and show them what that looks like.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you. Christian, I had a quick question for you. After reading your bio, it sounds like your work overlaps so many other intersections and social justice movements, right? I think that speaks volumes to the multi-dimensional anti-trafficking work and how multifaceted it is. Where do you see othering show up at these intersections?
To be honest, everywhere. There's no social movement that I know see othering survivors, othering marginalized people. It's very interesting for me that, especially in the anti-trafficking movement, a lot of times we are like, we are trying our best, we are trauma-informed, we really care about people. That's only superficial. Services are not culturally inclusive. People are not receiving trainings around their own bias. Service providers cannot recognize their privilege, and all these things. Even a lot of times, service providers, they don't really know the impact of trauma. And it's prevalent. This idea that survivors and victims, you want them to see them crying and be the perfect victim. Oh, please, I'm here helping me. And this savior complex that I have seen in all social justice movement, that is oh, if you don't fit that narrative, we're not going to help you. And I think that that's what Chanel and Crystal were talking about. That's why there are a lot of resistance. What? So because I'm not crying, because I'm not your ideal victim, you're not going to receive giving service. And that's really, really true. Chanel, I know that you want to add something. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that was one of the most, when I first started working in the anti-trafficking movement, that was something that was really frustrating for me, is why do you have to see me as a victim in order for you to care? I'm a human and I've been exploited, and that should not have been a part of my story. That shouldn't be a part of anybody's story, point blank period. Whether I'm in a space where I'm fully immersed in the trafficking and I don't see myself as a victim, that whether or not I see myself as a victim, why do you have to see me as a victim in order for you to care and do something about it? That shouldn't be the case.
It is so true. You can tell a lot of people, I don't have a place to live. I don't have food. I'm having problem with substance use. I don't have documents. I was just beat on the street. And literally, if you cannot tell, I don't know, someone is forcing me to do certain things, or someone is forcing me in the sex trade, or my partner is abusing me. If you don't check one box, literally it's oh, we cannot give you services. And it's what I'm telling you. And I think that that's the piece that it's lost how intersectionality, like regardless if you or myself I identify as a victim, like that is not going to remove my color skin. That is not going to remove like how I'm being oppressed. That's not going to remove how I'm being denied services because how I look like. That's not going to remove how I cannot access services because I cannot speak English. Like, and people really don't care. People a lot of times behind their desk, they are like, oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. I cannot give you services. And other thing that I have seen through all the work that I have been doing is that, for example, if organization works only in housing and someone arrives and there's like, oh, you don't fit this, it's like, okay, we cannot give you services. And it's like literally a person just came, tell their story, and they're like, oh, we cannot do anything for you. And literally they took them out. And it's like, I just share my story with you and you cannot even connect me with another organization, give me a referral, a follow-up, like nothing. Like, and this is happening everywhere. Name it: domestic violence, intimate violence partner, human trafficking, immigration, like happens everywhere. Like organizations really just like put a lot of like checkbox marks, like literally, like, and this is very upsetting because a lot of times we don't understand that human trafficking intersects with all these things. Human trafficking intersects with housing, intersects with food insecurity, intersects with oppression, privilege, intersects with racism, xenophobia, like, and a lot of times you are not going, all survivors are going to be like, I'm being exploited. Like a lot of times it can look like domestic violence, a lot of times it can look like substance abuse, a lot of times it can look like so many other things. And because on that first intake, it doesn't sound like it was like a good fit for you, like literally you're just missing their experience and just ignoring them. So I'm really making the call to other organizations, like have resource lists, create coalitions with other organizations out of the anti-trafficking movement, because every single time that you deny services to one person, regardless if they're a victim or not, like you're literally like silencing them away and telling them what probably other people have told them, like nobody cares about you.
Christian, thank you, because I think people in the audience, right, need to hear that. Like all of these movements, the question was like, where do they enter? Everywhere. Like, and because it doesn't register to you through maybe your limited lens that you're sitting at looking at this person with as human trafficking, right? Because you haven't registered it that way, you don't even provide the service. You don't even think to provide the support. You don't even think to refer, to connect, to build a bridge. And I think that is one of the things that is so heartbreaking, is it's like, I've just poured my heart out to you and nothing. Okay.
Right.
You know, just.
And you want me to trust you.
Right.
Yes.
And that just further fuels that distrust, right, of systems and all of the pieces. There's a quick question in the chat. I'm gonna ask you guys to respond to this as quickly as possible because I want us to be able to move to our next section. But how do we help girls that seem unwilling to tell their story and then shut down and get no services?
They don't have to tell their story to get services. If you provide a service, that's what you're providing. And especially if you are getting funding for a service that you say you're providing, you're going to help that person. This is exactly what we're talking about here as far as survivors. If you're getting funding for housing and it tells you that you're supposed to help 12 people and it doesn't give you specifics, and this person has been identified to you, let's say you're providing housing for, single moms, and they have to have children under the age of 6 in order to live in your housing according to your funding. And this person comes to you and she's been severely abused, and this mom has a 5-year-old who's going to be 6 in 3 weeks, but you have housing, you're supposed to help them. That's what your funding requires you to do. And so give them time. If you're providing a service and the victim doesn't want to speak, they don't have to speak. And you know that they're struggling, give them a chance. They'll come around to you if they know that you're sincere about what you're offering. If you're going to be sincere about what it is you're doing for them, do it. And say, you know, I know you don't want to talk about it right now, but at some point we might need you to give us some information so we can continue to help you. It sounds better than saying, no, I can't help you because you don't want to tell me what's going on. So I think it's better to be honest and say, hey, we want to help you, but because it's required from us to give certain information, I don't want to hear your whole story. You know, I'm sorry about what happened to you, or, you know, I don't know what happened to you, but I would like to help you. So whenever you feel comfortable with sharing minimal information so that I can help you, or I can connect you with someone who can help you if you know you can't. So it's just in how you approach it.
Thank you so much for that, Crystal. Chanel, I know you want to tag in, so can you do it in 30 seconds?
Actually, no, should I not? I think Crystal really just highlighted it. I just wanted to say, just in the model of the Open Doors program, it's definitely not a requirement. So if we get a referral and maybe the person has been identified already through DCF that they were a survivor or are a survivor of trafficking, and then we create the space and let them know that if they want to speak about the experience, they can, but they simply do not have to. Let's focus on what your needs and supports are and go from there. And then over time, as we build that trust, if they want to open up and share about it, then we can, but we definitely do not make that a requirement. Definitely not.
Love it. Thank you so much to everyone for giving your input. And so I just want to take a moment of pause because I recognize that that's emotional labor that y'all just put in, right? Talking about the experiences that you've had, the experiences that you have seen, and advocating for these issues, and it directly impacts your lives and the lives of those in the anti-trafficking movement. So you are seen, you are appreciated, you are valued. So much love and light to y'all. So I want us to kind of shift gears. We started off talking about what we've seen, right? But now I want us to focus a little bit on what does a more culturally responsive and inclusive movement look like, right? So what do you all see as best practices for individuals who want to help make the anti-trafficking movement more inclusive? What are some best practices that you have just off the top of your heads?
Try to resonate with them. I know, coming from a mixed background, I have the privilege of having biracial parents, and coming from a Latina background. You know, my father was an immigrant coming to America. He was 15. He came to New York, rented a room at the YMCA. And then I have like my all-American mom who just fell in love with my dad. So I grew up in a home where it was like, my dad did not speak English when he met my mom. And so I'm like, huh, how did that work? And so, you know, it's always been the little joke and stuff, and we can joke about it. But everyone is not Mexican. I've come across so many organizations that if you tell them you're Spanish, they automatically think you're Mexican. Or it's like, you know, so my father is mixed. My father is a Taino Indian. So he's from a reservation in Puerto Rico. It's very interesting. And, you know, there's so much culture behind it. So they're like, oh, Puerto Ricans are dirty. And I was like, are they? Because my family's not, you know? And so it's like, they see, oh, you're a Latina. And I was like, well, don't tell my mom, because my mom was like, no, she's Italian, you know? So it's like, there's so many avenues of how people view different cultures. And, you know, I have taken time to help whoever comes my way. So if I have someone who has been referred to me, and I know that they're, you know, from South America, you know, I'll take time and be like, so like, where are you from? Like, you know, what do you like from there? You know? And it's just trying to just generate small talk so that they feel comfortable with the atmosphere, the situation, and just kind of bringing down that level 10 of trauma And so I tend to be a little animated. So I'll just, make some humor with it. And depending on who the person is, like you can tell what's going to work for you. And I know if we not tend to not look at, hey, well, this is a Black girl. And, I've witnessed some, departments and agencies that are like, oh, maybe she wants to get her hair done. I'm like, maybe she doesn't. Maybe she wants to wear her afro. Mine's pushed down today. But it's like, what are we doing? What are we doing in that situation? Are we judging them because they are not groomed the way we think they should be groomed? They're not dressed the way we think they should be dressed. They don't live how we live. They're not organized, or they're not as clean as we think they should be. So it's just so many different things that are culturally bound that we have to respect. And also I believe that, spirituality and culture kind of runs together. Some NGOs are pushing a certain religion on people and forcing them to have to be a part of this in order to get services. You have to conform to their policy and procedures. And all that is understandable from the business aspect, but from the victim's aspect, they don't know about your policy and procedures. They don't understand those things. They don't want to understand those things. They just want to understand, are you going to help them or not? So it's go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, Crystal, you talked about they don't understand your policies. There's someone in the chat who said it's really heartbreaking when a program limits the number of times that they'll help someone, right? Like,
correct.
That's a policy that people have no understanding of, that is not a best practice that's going to actually help people, right?
Right.
And so when you talk about those moments of like policies that are in place within organizations, or cultural misunderstandings where there's no, not even cultural humility, but not even cultural curiosity, right? About why this is the way it is.
Right.
It deeply impacts people who are supposed to be receiving services from your organization.
Yeah. And I think sometimes they look at certain communities, like I can only speak from the Latinx and, the minority side, because I get judged on a lot of ways. And even though today that I am, healed and educated and, headed towards a positive direction and unbothered by a lot of things, prior to my healing, I was just like, what? They were like, Hispanics are not educated. Hispanics, like, we're only supposed to do agriculture and we're supposed to be the cleaning lady. There's certain labels that are put on Hispanics, like we can't be in leadership because we're supposed to be the cleaning crew, or we're supposed to be painting, or aren't we supposed to own a construction company, or we own gangs, like it's gang related, like there's so many labels that come with the Hispanic culture that it's like, what, are you serious? Or we're supposed to own a food truck, like we're supposed to sell plates of food. And there's nothing wrong with that, but that's not every Hispanic. And some Hispanics come here for a dream that has been told to them in their country, that America is the way to be, where to go. My father was told to come here because he can live better and be educated and he can have more opportunity. And you come here and the oppression is loud, very loud. So it's very sad. And that's why I can relate to some of the minorities and some of the discrimination that comes with it, because I have a mixed child. My son is mixed. And, he gets called all kind of things, told, why is he in this country? I mean, we had a situation, not to go off topic, but my son was pulled over by a police officer and his ticket was corrected, because the officer put that he was white and crossed it off, and then reissued the ticket as Afro-American and kinky hair. So I was like, well, I mean, fits the description a little better, but I was like, wow, he went the extra measure to correct my son's ticket. So seeing that from a different light and seeing the discrimination happen to someone close to my heart is very deep. And seeing it on the news or seeing it around or hearing my friends go through it is a little different. But when it hits home, it hurts. You know, it's so sad that we see this now. And even now in day and age where we have the opportunity to be free and to be united, it's like, can we be better about it? We have so many opportunities to be better and to, you know, have that love and be one. We are a great nation when we're united.
So how can we, and this is for all of the organizations on the call, right? How can we be better? What best practices can we use and put into place to be better? What does that look like?
Honesty. Be honest. If I met Christian for the first time, I'd be like, what? I'm like, so what's cool about Mexico? Like, what do you like? Like, you know, I'm not going to be like, hey, you want tacos? Rude. You know, like, so it's just little things, you know, like, it's very minor things that can affect, make a big effect on someone and really take them another direction. So I think it's just being, I want to say otherly, is that even a word, but just respecting who someone is. I don't care where you come from. If you need something and I'm able to help you, I want to help you. I genuinely want to help you. And if I don't understand something, I'm going to be very honest and say, I don't really know much about, you know, where you're from. Like, do you want to share? Like, what do you believe? What do you like? Like, what kind of things resonate with your country? Like, let them feel important, make them understand that they're a human. They're just like we are, you know, they're just in a situation that is not pleasing.
Awesome. Thank you. So, but go ahead, Christian. I see you want to hop in. What's up?
Go channel. I can go after you. Don't worry.
Okay.
So best practices for me, I would just say, to create a space of just really being culturally and diversified within the organization, within the leadership team. So providing those real opportunities for everybody, including survivors as well, including persons of color, including persons from different and diverse backgrounds. So, you know, we can't be an organization that, you know, serves a majority of, you know, African American or other persons of color, but then we not have them, you know, serving on the team. We should also be just creating that the diversified and just culture inclusivity within the organization and agency. So, you know, having diversity, equity, inclusion committee and groups trainings within the agency so that we're practicing it internally so that we can, you know, practice it outside of in the work that we do in the field with our clients.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Christian, and then I'll hop in.
Yes, I have, to be honest, I have so many things to do, but sometimes I'm like, oh, people get a little bit angry. The first thing that I will start is stop tokenizing survivors, your own staff, because for example, like Black History Month, I see a lot of events around, like inviting survivors, like Black survivors, and they're like, oh, can you come and talk about your trauma? Like, and of course, we are not compensate you, but this is like to honor Black History Month. Another example is when June, it's so funny to me. In the beginning, it was very offensive to me. It is very offensive, but when it's June, everyone is, oh, it's the LGBTQ plus month. A lot of people that I know in the different organizations, they cannot even pronounce LGBTQ plus, like LGBTQ, like that just show how you don't care about intersectionality, how you don't care about oppression, how you don't care like about really engaging. Like, I love how a lot of organizations, like, they put on their logos with the pride flag and all these things, and I'm like, how that is going to change something, like when all the other months, like literally you are not doing anything to raise awareness about the LGBTQ plus community, how you're being inclusive, how you are giving access to your service to specific communities. Latino Hispanic month is the same. Like everyone is like, oh, we love immigrants and all these things. And it's like, well, you don't have services in Spanish, but you love, of course, like the food. Like, I think that we are not mindful of all these things. Like, seriously, we're not mindful of oppression. We are not mindful about our privilege. We are not mindful about intersectionality. Like, these things, there are things that you can remove from people. And regardless, like, if you just want to show your support, like, that's not enough. That's not enough. Like, just wearing a pride flag or like creating a flyer for Black History Month or like sharing or create a post for Latino Heritage Month, like, it's not going to do like literally anything. If you continue, like, a lot of times I think that I hear Black History Month, Latino, LGBTQ plus months, a lot of organizations ask their own staff, like, can you train on this? And I'm like, wait, this is tokenizing. Like, you are literally taking them because how they look to train you, while that should be your work, and recognizing, like, giving your privilege. And I don't know, that's something that we just assume that we're on the same level because we work on organization and we really diminish like oppression. Like, oppression is present for us, like, not because I'm here sharing like all this space with amazing people and sharing my thoughts. That doesn't mean that oppression just disappeared. Like, I'm going to the street and oppression is still there. I'm going to the street and people is going to treat me in a specific way because how I look like. And this is going something to impact like every single day of my life until I die. Like, oppression is real, oppression is happening. And a lot of times in the anti-trafficking movement, we are replicating oppression. A lot of times we silence the people that don't look like us. I'm always like making the call, seriously. This has happened so many times. A lot of time I hear like how anti-trafficking organizations are like, how can we get more involvement from the Latino community, for the immigrant community, from Black people? I'm like, well, to start with, this room is full of white people with PhD, masters, like a lot of times I'm the only person who is a person of color, who is an immigrant, who can speak Spanish. And I'm like, let's start from there. Like, if you don't engage with the communities that you are serving, like, literally you are just replicating oppression. And you have like this complex of, I'm the hero savior, I'm the one that it's, like, and it's this idea that I don't have privilege because I'm helping others. And it's like, well, no, you cannot remove your privilege. Like, and privilege is not inherently wrong, but we use our privilege to help others. And that's one thing that I'm like right here because I have the privilege of being in this platform, and a lot of survivors, they don't. And that's why I need to speak the truth. Like, literally organizations need to, like, yes, let's be some more compassionate, let's really be trauma informed, but you know what, let's make the check on inside us, like, board of directors, like all these people, like, boards of directors most of the time are just white people, and I'm like, and you're serving marginalized communities, how this is going to reflect, how are you going to understand the needs of your community if any of you, if your staff doesn't know like the community? Like, seriously, like, these changes need to be done. And I know that it's hard, I know that there is a lot of resistance, but it's just the time. Like, we are becoming aware of how all these things are connected. We're becoming aware how human trafficking perpetrators, expires, like, prey on oppression. They use oppression like to exploit people. Don't become like them. Like, organizations and anti-trafficking advocates are there to stop exploitation. So let's not mirror what is happening on the streets.
Yes, let's not mirror what's happening on the streets. That's it, right? It's like when we come into spaces, it's look around, right? It's not just about look around and then also look within, right? Like, we have to start, a lot of this work starts with us as individuals, but it also starts with us as organizations, right? And connecting with each other to do some of this stuff. Like, you're not going to figure it out in a vacuum by yourself. You know, it takes talking to Christian, Crystal, Chanel, like people who are in different organizations who have a myriad of experiences and lenses that they're looking through. but also not tokenizing people within your own organization. Don't do that. That's the non-example. Don't do that to people. And I think that it's important when we have these conversations that we talk about best practices through a lens that actually impacts and uplifts people. So one of the things that I know we talked about in the past as a team was we need to mandate that police look for missing children. Oftentimes that's not something that happens as quickly as it should or for as long as it should, right? And we know that typically BIPOC folks bear the brunt of that. And so that's something that we need to take a look at. We also have to look at, we talk about, there's a right to work, but is there a right to exit? And that's another question that has continued to pop up. And so I wanted to hear you all's thoughts about either of those things, and that anybody anybody should be able to call 911 for trafficking and get an immediate response. Sometimes the response is really, really delayed. And that's a systemic challenge that creates a barrier for people who might be trying to escape exploitation. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's what systematic, what overarching things like that do you see that people on this call can take with them and rally behind?
So I can say that we have to remember that law enforcement is not social workers. They're not social workers. They're not trained to think like social workers. And we do have some law enforcement that have a compassion to really help people. And then we also don't want law enforcement to be watered down, because we do really actually want them to catch criminals, right? We do actually want them to take their job serious and really take those people off of the street. And it's hard to get law enforcement to see through a lens of compassion, and that's on purpose. We don't train law enforcement to see an eye to be like, oh, feel bad for them. No, we want law enforcement to see them like, hey, when they're out on the road and they see someone or they see what it looks like, is this person really prostituting? Is this juvenile really prostituting? Is this young girl, really 17, or is she 13? They're gonna lie. They're trained to lie. And so a lot of times I want to say, a lot of us, when we were in the life or coming out of the life, no one told us we were in the life. So you can't be like, oh, you're being trafficked. What? I was in my 20s. And when I was told that I was being trafficked, I was like, I don't even know what you're talking about. What is that? I'm like, no way. And it took a counselor to break that down to me. It didn't take the people that helped me at the shelter. It didn't take law enforcement, every time my offender tried to call the police on me. I was like, listen, I don't know. So I was taken to a domestic violence shelter. And, yes, I did have a lot of domestic violence, but then there was the human trafficking side that no one understood how to help me. So it's affecting a lot of people in a lot of ways. So we have to look at law enforcement for who and what they are. And I'm speaking for the law enforcement that are legit, that are following the code and the oath that they took, not the dirty cops. There's dirty everywhere. There's dirty all over, not just police officers. And so we have to remember, law enforcement, first responders, they're not trained with the eye of social services. So I would say, social service agencies and advocates and those allies, get with law enforcement. Y'all work together so that law enforcement can call you when they actually have someone in their vehicle, when they recover someone. Who is available for them to call? Who is that 24-hour contact? What agency is available to help law enforcement? Because most of the time, law enforcement is called. Most of these people are in a hotel, you know, or they're on the side of the road, or they look transient and people are calling the police on them because they look sketchy. And it's not, they're really looking for help. And if a survivor reaches out for help, I'm going to tell you that law enforcement is the last person I want to talk to. I'm just being honest. I don't want to be in trouble. You know, we see law enforcement, all of us on this call and on this presentation, if you see those lights behind your car, all of us get that, oh boy, what did I do? You know, we automatically see law enforcement as a problem. You know, law enforcement is not going around like saying, hey, you did great today, you didn't speed. They're not saying, hey, Chanel, thanks for not speeding today. Law enforcement doesn't give us praises. Law enforcement is there to enforce what needs to be enforced. So I think, you know, to see that in that light will help us understand that we all should collaborate together and help each other.
Thanks, Crystal. Christian or Chanel, thoughts? And I hate to put us on a clock, but if you could in 2 minutes or less, because we have a couple of questions that are floating up in the chat and also a call to action before we go.
Perfect. Well, I can. My recommendations, to be honest, is that the first is expansion of services, and we can do this through policy and legislation. I think that as an anti-trafficking movement, we need to start like having this conversation, and not everyone is going to label themselves as victim and survivors. And we need to recognize that the system of prostitution is exploiting people. Everyone that I have met that it's on the sex trade, regardless if they identify as victim of sex trafficking or not, they have needs. They are, most of the time, they are for marginalized communities. So we need to expand services regardless identification. That's the first thing. We need more funding for trafficking victims and sex trade, people impacted by the sex trade. Second, we really need to change our legislation around criminalizing people on the sex trade. And I'm telling about the people who are being bought and sold. That's why I think that we haven't moved anywhere, to be honest, because people who are engaged in the sex trade, in prostitution, a lot of times they don't know that they're being trafficked. A lot of times, like, I mean, when you are in the life, when you're being exploited, you don't think about like, what are the components of fraud or coercion that I'm going through, and like, what are my vulnerabilities that are being exploited? Like, that doesn't cross my mind. Like, the reality is that I need food, I need housing, I need love, I need support. Like, and that a lot of times is what we need to do. And instead of that, we have been criminalizing survivors, putting them in jail. Like, this is just increasing like the distrust in law enforcement, in organizations, and it's like causing like this disconnection between the people who are on the sex trade and the anti-trafficking movement. And we need to really understand that prostitution is a system that is exploiting marginalized people, marginalized community, people in need. And the third thing is that I would really recommend is keep accountable not only traffickers, but sex buyers. One really big thing, law enforcement are sex buyers a lot of times. How am I going to ask for help if they are the ones that are raping me? How am I going to ask for help if judges, lawyers, social workers are sex buyers? How am I going to trust all these people when they see me like in my dark moments, rape me, exploiting me, and just because they have disposable income, they're privileged because most of the time they are males, and they really don't care. We really need to acknowledge that prostitution, the sex trade, and sex trafficking, all of them are connected. And this is happening because sex buyers are the main financial like part of this. Sex trafficking and prostitution are happening because it's being kept by sex buyers. We need to keep accountable sex buyers. Sex buyer, like, a lot of times people are like, oh, like their needs and all these things. Like, I don't think that it's truly, to be honest, justice that now, just because people with disposable income, because that sexual entitlement, now I live to meet with PTSD, with anxiety, with depression. And on top of that, like the mistrust of law enforcement, the mistrust of organizations, because they cannot understand that. So I really think that we don't talk about this. We need to talk about this, how sex buyers hold a lot of, it's a main part of all this. It's a main part of all this. And I think that nonprofits, anti-trafficking organizations should have policies around like keep accountable like sex buyers. You cannot be an anti-trafficking organization and your own staff being sex buyers. Like, that doesn't add up. Like, law enforcement and be sex buyers, like, that doesn't add up at all. Like, at all. Doesn't make sense.
Absolutely. Thank you, Christian. Chanel, do you have anything to add? Okay, so I have a question in the chat, and I want to pose it to the panel. So it comes from someone in the audience who says that she's white, and she wants to know if she should get out of the work that she's doing and resign from the nonprofit board that she's on. In her experience, people on boards tend to be retired and want to still be involved in a healthy way to support the organization and do some work behind the scenes, right? But if she's white, is her lifelong passion and career working in nonprofit work and working with children something she should just turn away from? I've loved so much of what I've heard today, but several times this has come up. And so I'm wondering if it's time for me to step down. So that's a question that one of our audience members is carrying. And so I want to make sure that we address that, if we could, succinctly, and then we'll go ahead and close this out today.
I wouldn't super quickly. I wouldn't say that just get away, like say that I'm white. Like, it's not about it. It's really to share your privilege and be like, okay, I'm going to make this board more inclusive. I know some other people through my connections, through the people that I have worked, like, okay, let's make this board inclusive. Let's bring more people of color. Let's bring, like, I think that it's not about like, just like, oh, I'm a white person, I cannot do anything, or I'm privileged, or like, I'm a male, like I shouldn't be like on these spaces. Like, it's not about it. It's about like to really use that power that we have, that privilege, like to bring other people to the table and with being meaningful, being inclusive, and like have just that in mind. It's this conversation is not about like, oh, it's your blame, it's your fault. It's not about that. It's just about recognizing it and really create truthful connections with other people, like regardless of gender, race, or how we look like. Like, the way like to combat oppression is to break intersectionality, and you can make that change. Like, bring that intersectionality to your group, bring more people of color, empower other staff that probably are not white. Like, bring this conversation to your board. Like, if your board is all white, like bring that conversation to your board. That's what you should. I think that you can do, and that's something that I would really recommend. Like, bring this topic to all the people. It's not your fault. The reality is that white privilege is a systemic issue, and it's not about blaming one each other. It's about collaborating all together as a community, as human beings, and make the change.
And I think it's also, to your point, Christian, it's important to develop what Resmaa Menakem calls racial agility, right? So oftentimes when we're having conversations about race specifically, those conversations hold a charge, right? They always do. And so part of what we have to work through, and specifically our white counterparts on the call, is racial agility. So how do you handle that when it gets uncomfortable, right? And the feeling of, should I just walk away? That is a response because it is so charged and it is so weighted. But when you learn to work with those pieces within yourself, when you learn to build community to work with those pieces, when you do some knowledge and education, you have some cultural humility, you begin to recognize that, like, I am a part of this. We all are a part of this. We're all in this, and some of this we had no say in. And then there are pieces, to Christian's point, that we do have a say in. We have a say in our privilege, and we have a say in how we can use that privilege to impact spaces. But we have to develop the racial agility to do that, right? Like to sit in that discomfort and say, all right, let me do some self-excavation, let me do some exploring, right? And work through those pieces. Does anybody else have anything to add on that point? We've got about 8 minutes left and I wanted to move us to closing, but if there's something.
Yeah, I just want to say, don't leave any position because of us. don't make that. We don't want to make that decision for you. I definitely don't. But if you feel that your voice is not working on that panel anymore or on that board, move to one that will hear your voice regardless of who you are and who you represent.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So we have about 7 minutes left, right? And in our time remaining, oftentimes we talk about the anti-trafficking movement in these like bubbles, like, right, we're doing this over here, we're doing this over here. But the work has to come together with a collective force to push forward to change policy, legislation, right? All of those pieces that we drastically need, even procedures within organizations. So what we want to encourage people to do right now is look in your chat box. Go ahead and pull that up. If you can't find it, just pull it up really quickly. And we invite you to share where you're located and what your focus is in the anti-trafficking movement. Part of this is because we want to figure out who has legislation in common that you're doing advocacy work for right now, that we could come together and push forward and make this happen. So, or if you have a specific idea on how to create systems change, you can put that in the Q&A. We're going to spend the next 5 minutes just having a little bit of discussion about that. And I might only get to 1 or 2, but we would love to hear from you before you head out today. And there is a comment where Sharita says not seeing color is not the goal. And I completely agree with that. It's not about coming into a space and not seeing color, right? We are a mosaic of experiences, our race, our gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, veteran status, right? All of those are different parts of our identity. And so what is the goal is to show up in a space and have all of those identities respected and seen and taken into account. That's how you create culturally responsive services and services that come from a space of cultural humility. So if you guys see somebody who's doing some stuff that you like, it's coming in the chat in real time. So just make sure that you're keeping an eye on that. Or if there are any questions that are still lingering, we'll take the last few minutes to address those. And there's another comment that's asking not to stereotype all people. And so one of the things that I will say is when we have conversations about race in this country, they're incredibly charged because they come with lots of history. And so what I'd encourage is for anyone on this call who's wanting to do more work, wanting to do more excavation around that work, there are several books to read, but Resmaa Menakem's My Grandmother's Hands is one of my absolute favorites because it talks about some of that stuff. And there's a few people who are talking about creating an intervention tool using film for healing. So that's happening in Indiana by distributing it everywhere. So that's exciting.
It's exciting.
Yes, very exciting. Okay. So there's a lot of comments about how this has been really great for the people in the audience. People are really feeling like they've learned and taken away a lot from this. And so I'm eternally grateful to Christian, to Chanel, to Crystal, and also to Eric, who wasn't able to be here today, but we hold their spirit and their light in this space. And so much immense gratitude for the Voices for Florida team and our panelists. Just thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We wish you a productive week. And if you have any further questions, please feel free to follow up with the team at Voices for Florida or contact myself or any of the other panelists. We'll be sending out evaluation forms and resources that were discussed and certificates shortly. So I'll stick around for just a few more minutes if any other questions bubble up. And if the panelists want to do the same, that would be great. We have a few minutes remaining. But if there are any other lingering questions, we'll address them now. Otherwise, thanks y'all so much for coming. It's been an honor to have you in the space. We hope that you learned something today that you can take with you. So thanks.
While we wait, I just would like to share, to be honest, that if in your state there is anti-trafficking legislation, share it with other networks, with other states, not only legislations. And also I will encourage everyone to not only advocate for legislations for minors, but also for adults. I think that there is a lot of focus on minors, especially under 18, but a lot of times there is really no change from someone from 17 to 18, from someone to 20 to 21. Like the vulnerabilities are still there, oppression is still there, the needs are still there. So I will encourage that. Also keep an eye. I will encourage for equality model legislation. It's happening in a lot of states, New York, Massachusetts, Vermont, Louisiana, and some other states are having the conversation. I really think that as a movement, we will need to move forward. And it's literally just that keep accountable traffickers and sex buyers, criminalizing people engaged in the sex trade, and the expansion of services. I cannot highlight more, we need to expand services and make sure that we have funding for all the services, not only for kids, but also for adults.
Any other final thoughts? The recommended book title was My Grandmother's Hands by Resma Menakem. That's one that you can read, but there are several out there. If each of the panelists, do any of you have a book that you feel like, this one has helped, that you think our audience could benefit from? Any? There's a comment about white fragility. There's also another.
That's
really
a good book.
So, well, we appreciate you guys coming with us today as we've journeyed through personal experiences around what could be done better, a push and a call for action for the entire anti-trafficking movement, and also about best practices. We just thanks y'all for taking the time, sharing the space, and we will be in contact soon. You'll get contact from Voices for Florida, and we'll go from there. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.